So thanks for the introduction. How many people here saw me talk last year or at some other conference? Good thing I changed my slides then. So TES basically used to be the Times Education Supplement, so some of you may recognize that. We're a company now that basically we have customers across pretty much every country in the world. We have the biggest teaching resource sharing marketplace that allow teachers to sell resources to other teachers globally. We've just surpassed 1 billion downloads from that platform and are doing, in the sort of tens of thousands of transactions per week. We also run the biggest teacher education recruitment business in the UK and are rapidly expanding that internationally. So TES is a really interesting business. The interesting thing about TES, and this kind of has implications around the sort of challenges that we face. I mean, I think the last talk was really interesting about the fact that you can use microservices as a kind of thin end of the wedge within a bigger organization. What I'm going to talk about today is the fact that we took a very similar approach at TES, but we're now 3 years on. And what I'm going to talk a little bit about is actually from the perspective of the engineers who work for me, what are their thoughts, what are their perspectives on where we are now, and what does that look like compared to what they may have experienced previously. So the key thing to keep in mind is, TES isn't a single platform. We don't have a single product that we've broken into microservices. TES is about 5 different disparate businesses that all sit under the same common technology platform. And those businesses are remarkably different. Our sort of B2B marketplace is more something like Etsy or Airbnb. Our jobs business is something like Monster or Indeed. We have a continuous professional development teacher training business. We have a traditional news publishing platform that's more like the Daily Mail. So these are all completely different domains, all kind of supported under the covers by the same microservice-based technology platform. So before I talk about what my engineers think about microservices, I thought I'd just sort of share a little bit with you guys what my philosophy was around structuring the team and the architecture. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we got here. When I joined TES back in 2014, it was a single .NET platform. It was about 10 years old at that point. We did something very, very similar to the McKinsey experience. We set up a small team that operated in a completely different way to the existing organization, relaunched the entirety of our resources platform on the back of that team. It took almost 12 months. This is a huge platform. We not only migrated it to AWS, but we also re-implemented the entire kind of marketplace dynamic at the same time. We then progressively, over the next kind of 12 to 18 months, attacked the other verticals on the site, migrated them all over to AWS, all over to the new platform. And I think I'd broadly say that we were finished with the migration in around 18 months, which at the breadth of TES's business is pretty good going. And then, post that, we've basically just been iteratively adding new features, rolling out into new markets, launching new businesses and new products. And I think we're absolutely in a position now where some of those incremental gains that you might get in that first project are now really embedded within the organization. So back to my philosophy. I think one of the key sort of tenets that I hold really dear is the fact that your architecture and your culture within an engineering team are inextricably linked. You can't decouple them. And ultimately, the architecture of your system will either break or empower the culture that you want. If you're all sitting on top of a 180,000 line Java monolith, and you're sitting there trying to break yourself into feature teams, move quickly and release fast, it's not going to work. So you have to change both at the same time. The other element that's very important is that all of us will have experience with projects where ultimately those projects have been delivered by a small group of really capable individuals. Even if the team's bigger than that, typically it's a small group at the heart of it that actually gets all the work done and ships things. So we basically build this philosophy into everything we do, and we try and set up very small teams that are genuinely empowered and remove all externalities and bureaucracy as much as we can. And ultimately, my job and the job of my senior team is to change both the architecture and the culture at the same time. If you don't change them at the same time, you won't get the results that you expect or want. So what's a team at TES? We have sort of standardized around, each of our teams is 3 to 4 people. We have some teams up to 3 or even 2, mostly because we're very stretched at the moment. We work in a very seasonal way, as you can imagine. Teachers go back to school at the same time, and as a result, pretty much every product we launch has to happen before the new school year. If we miss that window, then we miss a huge opportunity to kind of drive new products into the market. So this is actually the busiest time of year for us. Lots of other people are going on holidays. All the teachers go on holidays. We're furiously trying to finish all the products that we want to get into market before the new school year starts. So we have a lot of small teams, 3 to 4 people. If you saw my talk last year, you'll know that these teams are only engineers. We have no QAs at TES. The engineers are responsible for quality. The engineers also own their stack end to end. They're responsible for deploying the containers onto the production platform, and they're responsible for production support of those containers. And they have genuine end-to-end ownership. In terms of our architecture, not dissimilar, I suspect, to many of the things that you guys are moving towards. We only deploy containers. It's been like this since we started the transformation at TES. So, we were using Docker from some of the earliest versions when we probably shouldn't have been using it in production, but we were hugely bought into the idea of what container-based deployment management could do. We do all of our CI and continuous delivery in Jenkins. We don't have fully automated releases to productions. An engineer has to hit the button, but we sort of see similar rates of change in our production environment. You certainly in the kind of 50 to 60 releases a day across a range of teams. Again, the same benefit in terms of anyone who's deploying with containers, we can roll back incredibly quickly. We definitely take the view that we should measure everything within production, both business and system metrics, and we release a change, whether it be behind a feature toggle or otherwise. If the metrics say it's not good, we roll back, and that rollback is fast and simple, and we probably do a couple of those each week, to be fair. Every engineer, this is another nuance of TES, we have a very distributed team, and it's important to me personally. I do a lot of work on the train. Any engineer can work from anywhere. So we actually don't use a lot of the inbuilt AWS services for this reason. They don't have good offline. Some do, but not all of them have great offline alternatives. And it's important that I can disconnect myself from the network and I can continue to work. And this allows us to work not just as we're moving and traveling, but also we have people all across the world working on TES as a platform. And what this means is that their performance and experience as an engineer at TES is as fast as it can be. And we really care a lot about metrics. We use Datadog for pretty much everything. And all of our kind of core application frameworks, we have a wrapper around Express, which is what we use to build most services, that makes it incredibly easy for engineers to basically log a set of metrics based on the usual things, such as response times and error codes, but also business level metrics. So you'll see, for example, we might have a team that's responsible for getting the job applications from teachers to schools. They've got a dashboard that has no technical metrics. It's all about the business metrics. How many applications did we receive? How many of those got sent to the school? How many of the schools actually opened the applications on any given day? And all of that happens out of this effectively stats-D wrapper around Datadog. In terms of our environment, so we've been at this a lot longer than most. So we have around 137 services, and we have some sort of definitions that we use internally. Infra are things like Solr, MongoDB, MySQL. This is a sort of a definition of a Docker container you'll spin up locally as effectively an infra component. Modules, so this is sort of your typical shared module. Might be something related to localization or something else related. UI components in React. Services, these are typically APIs, but also things that deal purely with message passing. We use RabbitMQ as our MQ and have a huge amount of asynchronous messaging under the covers. And then we have a definition of a thing we call an app, and an app is basically anything that serves a UI. So these are the sort of vertical pieces that you'll see as you browse around TES. So I said, rather than me prattling on, I thought I'd sort of give you a view of what the engineers at TES think of our platform. So we have there's about 60 people. This is sort of a mix of both software engineers as well as those who operate our platform. So it's perspectives from all of those sides. If you think about the engineering team at TES, and particularly if you listened to my talk last year, you'll know we've been through a huge change. So the bulk of those engineers have been there for less than 2 years. So very, very few of the engineers who were at TES when I started 3 years ago and worked on that .NET platform are still at TES today. which I think just gives an indication of both the scale of organizational change we had to go through, but also the difference in the types of skills and experience that you need between a sort of a legacy enterprise.NET environment where you release once every 6 months into the sort of environment we talk about now, where engineers are empowered to ship things live as soon as they feel it's ready. The other key thing is 90% of our engineers either work remotely full-time or some of the time. So our culture is very much distributed. We've got engineers in San Francisco, Miami, Johannesburg, Cape Town, Spain, Italy, you name it. We've got them everywhere. We have very much a culture which is about hiring good people wherever they are, and elements of our architecture and our processes really support that. And this has been a huge element to the growth at TES. I think if I'd tried to get hold of 60 really good engineers in central London, I probably would have struggled. And this works really, really well. So I asked all of the engineers what their first impressions were. So the advantage of most of them being there for less than 2 years is they actually walked into the architecture. And I think it's fair to say that most of them were pretty overwhelmed at first, which I think echoes, if you listen to some of Fred George's talks around microservices in general, typically when you first sort of walk into a microservice architecture, particularly if you've come from a different environment, maybe a big startup where the entire app is a Ruby on Rails app, you sort of look at this and think, what the hell is going on? This just feels insanely complicated. I think the key thing which we recommend to all new starters is to not try and take in everything at once. Typically, you'll only be working in an area that kind of has a limited radius of services that are related to a specific function. You don't have to understand everything at once. And as you develop and understand the area that you're working in, you recognize that the same patterns you've just learned are stamped out and applied across the organization. I like the blind man in the room with an elephant. I know exactly which engineer that was. So we also help the onboarding process. We have a sort of an engineering guidebook, particularly as new starters join. We have them update this. We have a champion who tries to keep this up to date that sort of describes, why do we do the things we do? How do we serve a page at TES? How do you deploy something? How do you ask for holidays? All that sort of stuff sits within our TES engineering guide. I think the next thing, I guess, once you've got past your first impressions, is how long does it actually take you as an engineer to feel like you can get something done? Is this architecture so complicated that it takes you months before you feel like you've got a good handle on it and can get things done? The positive is that most people felt they were getting something useful done within days, which is fantastic, and I think is a really good indication that one of the things that microservices gives you is if you do get that compartmentalization right, then actually people can just focus on the thing that they're doing, the problem that they're solving, and then they can get that thing into production. So we definitely try within the first week of any engineer being at TES, they have to be deploying code into production within their first week. Some of them take a bit longer, and some of them have taken a huge amount of time to get their head around the whole thing. I think one of the interesting things as you see engineers join and look at this environment, there are some people who are really comfortable just worrying about the bit that's directly under their control. There's others who feel it's really, really crucial to understand the whole thing, and without understanding the whole thing, they feel less productive. And I think the key thing here is also this element that we didn't design, if you look at the platform now, we didn't design the platform top down to operate the way it operates today. We didn't sit there and come up with a potential service catalog that we ticked off. We built those services, we refactored them, we pulled them apart over a number of years. And I think if you sort of treat the platform as a living thing where none of those services potentially are things that are going to be too long-lived, then again it sort of just helps you get your head in the right spot. So 90% of our engineers push code live at least every couple of days. So this is personally pushing code live, not them as a team. I think my VP of engineering is the only one who answered never. I'm not sure why I work here. And positively, pretty much all the engineers at TES think that getting code live is pretty simple. As I said before, we use Jenkins. We use the promotions plugin with Jenkins. Once your container is built, it's incredibly easy just to push that up to live. I then asked them, if you look at this crazy thing, 180 odd services, what's the thing that you would change if you could? And interestingly, they all pretty much, a large part of them, said we need to be more consistent. One of the kind of supposed benefits of microservices is its ability to experiment. and do different things. Obviously, that experimentation is great, but over the long term, what you see is a proliferation of patterns, ideas, modules, and actually the reality is that that proliferation of patterns and ideas over time does start to slow you down. You have to think about the impact of that. And this is one of these interesting questions where I suspect if I asked everybody individually, they would all tell me that everybody else should be consistent with them, rather than the organization itself being consistent. So this is an ongoing challenge. The other one, which I think is interesting and is linked to an earlier view of not invented here, we started on this journey 3 years ago. Our whole stack pretty much is Node. At that time, many of the things that we use today, React, Redux, Sagas, all this sort of stuff, these things didn't exist. So if you look at some of our first services, we did a lot of this stuff by hand. We still have some services in Happy, some in old versions of Express. We've got pretty much, if you consider the kind of rate of change, not just in the Node ecosystem, but also the broader JavaScript ecosystem over the last 3 years, we've seen everything. So we're getting to a point now where we're starting to think, maybe we should actually start to jump on some of the sort of more active open source, bigger frameworks that might speed us up, like Next.js or Create React App. So this is a view from our service catalog. So you can see this is just a very small selection. Even just Lodash, like I have talked about the fact that we're a Lodash distribution service. We have like 20 versions of Lodash deployed across a range of services. But you'll notice even in things like React, we have like 8 or 9 different versions of React bundled into some of the applications. And again, this is just an indication that as you sort of allow different areas to move, and also just the cost of keeping these things up to date. Because as you're moving forward and building new features, how much time are you dedicating to going back to some of these services that actually aren't changing from a business perspective, and just upgrading all the modules. Particularly, and Lodash is actually a great example, which is every version change is in many instances a breaking change. So not only are you bumping the version, you're also rewriting half the methods that have changed from version to version. So I think this is the point where it would have been great if Fred was here. But one of the key things that we've learned is that many of your services are actually very long-lived. Some of the early microservice views of the world said, look, they're all tiny, don't worry about it. If you need to change it later, just rewrite it. The reality is that just isn't correct in many instances. In many instances, a service may sit there doing its job for years, and that's okay. Rewriting it will have really, really little business value. And is that okay? I think it is. But we do try and do something about it. So we have a role which we call our consistency champion. You can sort of think of this if we use HipChat, not Slack, but if you're in HipChat and someone starts bike shedding about something, we call in the consistency champion and start to have a chat about, this is someone who just helps moderate the conversations. Should we be using Ramda these days, or are we sticking with Lodash? Are we just using ES6 features and trying to keep things simple? As well as some of the bigger stuff. We do 2-day hack days every month where engineers get to work on their own thing. Some of the teams individually now have started to use those 2 days to do what we call spring cleaning. Just go through some of the old services, just bump up all the module versions. Migrate them all to Node 6, get rid of Babel and other things that we don't need anymore. We're getting better, I don't think we've cracked it, at managing the service catalog. We have tools that basically go to GitHub and go to our live environment, grab all of the services, their dependencies, and we can basically draw a view of any of those that have outdated modules, outdated Node versions. We do still run Node 10 in production. We have services, again, that we wrote 3 years ago that do very little because we were really good at making them small. They've never changed. And again, building the time to basically go and do something about those, you've actually got to schedule around all the other business functions you're trying to deliver. Every team has tech debt boards. So, as we're going along, we try and maintain a view of tech debt. The teams then try and prioritize those tech debt cards against any of the product features that we're trying to deliver. I think it's an important thing as a team that we actually question whether the value of doing something about that tech debt is actually there against the business features that we could be developing at the same time. And we also have a process around internal QA. We use some of our own products to sort of drive question and answer and other things. What's the kind of best way of building a React app these days? And we have knowledge share every week where teams can talk to each other. which if you consider the fact that the team's remote and distributed, we don't get a lot of the kind of inter-office chats, so we pull everybody together, get people to present things that work for them across their teams each week. So sort of on this maintenance burden, I asked them if they thought that microservices created a higher long-term burden. Because the reality is, in a monolith, you wouldn't have this problem of the monoliths, slowly but surely different parts of it getting out of date. You would have a different problem, which is you may not be able to upgrade something because some other part of the system may not like it. And actually, it's a bit fuzzy. The bulk of the others were people telling me that it was a leading question and I should be asking a different one. But what I take from this is that actually, from a kind of long-term maintenance ownership perspective, the view is that it's neither better nor worse. We've just got a different set of problems. But interestingly, that different set of problems is massively outweighed by the fact that we are exceptional and it is incredibly easy to roll out new services. So the flexibility that we get far outweighs the fact that we don't necessarily get a benefit from kind of long-term maintainability of the platform. Where do we get things wrong? I think, the usual. We make things that are too big. We make things that are too small. Particularly at the start, we really drank the microservice Kool-Aid. Every time we had a new thing, we made a new service. We've been unwinding that and sort of thinking a bit better about some of the domain and ownership boundaries around the teams and what the sort of breakup would look like. We often potentially overcomplicate things, have a few too many layers. It's a little bit difficult to trace through what's going on. And probably the big one, which is, we're so focused on, trying to deliver value for the business that ultimately we don't create the window to come back and clean up later. But I will echo this again, we are exceptional at rolling out new things. So while this is a business that's growing really fast and we're moving into new territories and we're building new products and features, my view at this point, and the view shared by my boss, the CEO, is that we've got that balance right. We're exceptional at rolling out new things. We're exceptional at trying new products. Everybody thinks that the architecture is inextricably linked to the culture. Again, this is probably a leading question. You'd expect them to say this. But interestingly, where they feel that we haven't got it right, and I think this would be echoed in many other companies, is that while we've made a huge change within the technology team, that change hasn't necessarily been echoed within the business teams. Many of those business areas still have a very legacy kind of corporate mindset around how products and features should be delivered. You hear lots of words like programs and governance and all of these things, which are sort of the polar opposite of what a small empowered team focused on a vision and an outcome really is about. So part of that is things that I need to do more about. This view of, we do have a separation between, the engineers who look after our platform, effectively managing AWS and, things like Terraform, and the engineers who are deploying into containers on top of that platform. We probably need to smash some of those walls down a little bit more. So there's more we can do. I think where it gets a bit blurrier in terms of are we doing all right? People aren't really sure if we're doing enough around tech debt. I think this probably indicates that we haven't got the balance too far off. I think if they felt we were doing everything on tech debt perfectly, then that means we're probably not delivering enough business features and vice versa. And the next question, which is around tools, we invest. I've spoken at a number of conferences a few years ago around some of the tools that we've built, one in particular called Bosco, which is a service that, basically a tool that allows you to manage all of the services locally on your machine. Do we invest enough time in this? Most people don't think so. If you look at it, basically I'm the main committer. So we haven't really managed to distribute that out across the team. We absolutely couldn't work without this tooling. There's no way we could manage 170 services and 15 odd teams without tooling that allowed developers to manage this. What do you like most about our platform? So try and end on a more positive note. New work flies into production. To sort of echo that point, if we want to build something new, if we've got a new idea, we can get it live super fast. We've decreased the risk. We don't worry about side effects as much. And it puts very few limits Obviously, those limits have side effects, right? We have this kind of plethora of things. And if you walk into an old part of our platform, you can suddenly be confronted with something that looks very alien to the parts of the platform that you were working on previously. And obviously, the fact that you can run the stack on your PC, I think being able to do this actually means that you can unplug your laptop and work from anywhere, which has been a huge benefit for us culturally. So I think I'm going to finish because I think we've got the minute silence very soon, and I've got a minute. So what I want to leave you guys with is basically a set of thoughts. The architecture enables your culture. And I think all of us probably are here today because we want to be part of cultures that are sort of the ones I described. These sort of small empowered teams doing interesting things where they own the product, where they understand the business, and they're focused on getting things done. You have to think about your architecture and culture at the same time. We have absolutely proven that microservices can make you move fast. I mean, we've built an enormous amount of things in the last 3 years, and we're just continuing to speed up. And we've also proven that we can scale up the number of engineers, and that doesn't impact our overall productivity. The other one, I think, which is important, is that this idea that all the services are throwaway and easy to rewrite, it's a fallacy. The reality is you do have a set of services that will be long-lived. Some of them may be bigger than you want. The best example we have a payment platform that sits behind our marketplace. That thing's complicated. It's a single domain. It deals with multi-currency and VAT rules and all sorts of other things. We care about that. And then I think you need to also then balance consistency with freedom to experiment. Thank you.